Good evening and welcome. I hope everyone out there is well, and thank you for joining us. On behalf of Alpha Phi Alpha's General President, Brother Willis Lonzo III, I am Jeffrey Sterling, the Surgeon General for Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Really looking forward to tonight's topic, so I'm going to get to it quickly, but I just have a few thoughts for you to rumble around in your brains while you listen to tonight's talk, because this is the type of thing that we've ignored to a certain extent in hopes that it would go away. Would you believe me if I told you that under a quarter of adults 18 years and older, and just about 10% of kids have received the updated COVID vaccine? And that's in the face of about 267,000 people having died from COVID-19 in 2022. There's not a day that I work where I'm still not diagnosing people with COVID and influenza, where people still aren't dying from these things. 30,000 people a year have been dying from influenza forever. Just because we don't think about it doesn't mean it's no longer there. It's no longer a threat. It's still not taking our loved ones away from us. And that being said, I have, in the midst of 25, almost 30 years of clinical practice, yet to see a vaccine-related death. In emergency medicine, we call that being more afraid of the side effect than we are the actual disease. Tonight, we're going to get into why we're like that and what can be done to help us just take better care of ourselves along these lines. Because when it comes time for us to make choices that would protect us, such as traveling, we are more comfortable doing things that leave us at risk, it seems, than doing things that protect us. So, with that in mind, allow me to introduce tonight's moderator, Alpha's Deputy Surgeon General for Healthcare Disparities, Brother Dr. Colonel Robert Carter. Brother Carter is a doctorate and a full professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine at the University of Texas Health in San Antonio, Texas. He is also a colonel of medical services in the U.S. Army. He is an elected fellow of the American College of Epidemiology and the American College of Sports Medicine. Of course, he's a life member of Alpha Phi Alpha. I'm proud to have him as our Deputy Surgeon General. He is the perfect person to lead this conversation and just come to this with no judgments. I hope that we have people that are vaccine skeptics because, we don't judge, we treat. We just want to provide information and allow you to be educated in the decisions that you'll make that will impact your life. So, Brother Dr. Carter, have a great show, and let's educate our brothers and the community.
Thanks, Surgeon General Dr. Sterling, Brother Sterling, as always, for the warm introduction. Tonight, really excited about tonight's topics. I'll have the panel members introduce themselves here shortly. But first of all, this is an exciting discussion. When we think about African Americans in our history within the medical system, dealing with health disparities, racial injustices, and we think about how that played out as we navigated the COVID-19 pandemic. Tonight's discussion, we'll have an opportunity to hear from Dr. Narcisse, Brother Narcisse, Deputy Surgeon General, as he addressed the front line from dealing with patients as a clinician, administering vaccines, discussing vaccines within the community. And also exciting, which probably less people are aware of, we had Brother Owen Roberts as a member of Operation Warp Speed that was playing a critical role in developing the vaccines and therapeutics. And it's just an exciting time. When we think about the intersection of African American history, vaccinations, clinical trials, it's a complex tapestry woven in triumphs and tribulations. And tonight we're going to have an opportunity to talk about some of the triumphs. So I would first of all turn over to Brother Owen Roberts to introduce himself as we begin this discussion.
Good evening. My name is Owen Roberts. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I'm a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army, also one of your brothers as well. But really, I'm just so proud to be here, and thank you for the introduction. I'm honored to have been able to have been selected to serve on Operation Warp Speed. One of the things that brought me to that actual mission was I had lost a couple of family members to COVID in the early start of the pandemic, and I felt a calling, and one of my mentors was able to pull me onto the program as an acquisition officer. Actually, I don't have necessarily a scientific background; it's more acquisition. But I am a medical service corps officer, so I've been in the health related space for over 20 years as a healthcare administrator. But more importantly, I got to be involved in the fighting of the pandemic from a therapeutic and vaccine space, and developing of medical countermeasures to help those at-risk communities, specifically our own. And I'll be able to talk you all through that this evening. And really, it was very eye-opening because there are social disparities that are affecting our communities. And I think whatever your beliefs may be regarding the vaccines, the data is the data. And I can tell you that there was a lot of rigor that was put in place to ensure that the vaccines that are out there were safe and effective for those people at high risk. And should you fall in that social category, that it would be in your best interest to listen to your healthcare provider and follow those instructions. So again, a pleasure to meet you all, and look forward to the discussion.
Yes, sir. Look forward to that discussion. And yeah, it's going to be an exciting discussion tonight. Okay, I would like Deputy Surgeon General, Brother Narcisse, my battle buddy who's been there for me as we've done a number of sessions together. Dr. Narcisse, please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Brother Victor Narcisse. I'm a physician in Houston, Texas. I attended Tulane University and was initiated at Roy Oda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Tomorrow is actually my Alphaversary. And I'm currently a member of Alpha Eta Lambda chapter and seated in Houston, Texas. I'm a physician, I'm an internal medicine physician, geriatric medicine, boarded physician, and I serve as the associate division head of hospital medicine at Houston Methodist Hospital, and the director of clinical research for hospital medicine. I spend a lot of time taking care of patients in the hospital when they're very, very sick, and so we see the benefits of medications, new and old, and so we have a unique perspective on that. I've also served in the past and currently on the hospital's pharmaceutical and therapeutics committee, where we actually oversee the consideration of new medications and decide how we want to use them in our institutions. And I've done that in several institutions in the Texas Medical Center, and I currently serve in that committee for Houston Methodist Hospital.
Thanks to both of you brothers for introducing yourself. And again, thanks tonight for participating in this critical discussion. So as we begin to dive into this discussion, I can imagine from both your perspectives, from the acquisition side, participating as a developer, as an acquisition professional on warp speed, knowing the history of African Americans, the role we played both positive and negative in the past in clinical trials, vaccinations, and then Brother Narcisse, again in Houston, treating patients, understanding those disparities, growing up in New Orleans, still in the South, and Houston, and understanding that's a pretty sizable, both of those are cities with a sizable African American population. And then when we African Americans often think about the history, the first thing comes to mind is the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. For many of us, we're very familiar with that. We learned about it in school, we heard about it, rumors about it, but the Tuskegee syphilis experiment was one of the most infamous chapters in the history of medical research involving African Americans. That it was conducted from 1936 to 1972 by the United States Public Health Service. The study involved withholding treatments from hundreds of African American men with syphilis to observe, for the nation to observe, the medical system to observe the natural progression of the disease. The study basically made, now we know it's one of the studies that is often utilized when we think about ethical violations, and underscores the deeply rooted mistrust that many minorities, specifically African Americans, have in medical institutions, specifically when they think about therapeutics. So my first question is really for Brother Narcisse. I would like you just to think about, as the, and then we'll get to Brother Roberts, who probably had to deal with this from his perspective as well. But given his history, his complex history of African Americans, therapeutics, during the pandemic, we continued to hear how fast it was being developed, and there was some discussions also about getting the vaccine out to minority communities, so that we can mitigate some of the health disparities, overcome some of those notions. But again, Brother Narcisse, Dr. Narcisse, how did that impact your approach, and what were some key considerations from a clinical perspective as you offered and treated patients as the therapies and vaccines were coming out from their perspective?
So I think that it's important to understand about the drug development process. And the basic concept that everyone needs to know is that as a healthcare community, we're trying to evaluate your risk versus your potential benefit. And the medications, about 50 drugs come to market in the United States currently on an annual basis. For those medications, there's been a very, very careful weighing of the risk versus the benefit. And so when the risk is high, we look at drugs differently than if the risk was low. If the benefit is high, we look at the drug process differently than when the benefit's low. So whenever a drug is being approved to use by the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, years of consideration has gone into that decision making. In my own hospital, I'm part of the decision making apparatus that sits and evaluates medications, and similarly, we look at years of data that have affected, and lots of research studies that have been conducted to try to decide whether a medication is worthwhile using for patients. And so that's a really important piece. And so as we look at diseases that disproportionately affect the African American community, this conversation is even more important. So my background's in Alzheimer's disease. My early research endeavors, successful and otherwise, have been focused around Alzheimer's disease, and the risk to African Americans is immense. If you look at other diseases like sickle cell anemia, the risk to African Americans is immense. COVID-19, there were obvious early signals that the risk to African Americans and persons of color was disproportionately higher. The risk was immense compared to other populations. And so that's a huge part of the conversation that we consider. The other things that we look at include the cost of the drugs and the ultimate treatment. In my hospital, obviously the hospital is part of paying for those drug costs. But when we look at whether or not something is worthwhile doing, is it going to be available to people? There are several sickle cell anemia medications that have been approved by the Food and Drug Administration in the last several years, but the cost is immense. In one case, it's just over $2 million, and the other just over $3 million for the treatment. So tremendous benefit for the individual, but it comes at a high cost. And so when we look at the cost and the way that the drugs were studied, what populations were they studied in. And this is where I actually would put a request, a plea into our communities that increasingly medications are precise and they target smaller and smaller numbers of individuals because they use in many cases, increasingly they're using the genetics of the human body um, to uh, to try to fight against the disease. And so then it becomes a matter of, has this medication been studied in the population that we are trying to use it in? And so if you're a member of the African American community, it's only that people agree to participate in sickle cell anemia trials that these sickle cell anemia drugs came to market. So if there are things that are important to us, diseases that are important to us, then we have to be part of the evaluation process, because if a drug comes to market and it does a great job of curing prostate cancer, but it doesn't work on everybody equally, maybe it doesn't work on people of African American descent. But we don't know that unless people of African American descent are part of the consideration of those drugs. So I think those are the important things that I like to talk to or think about when we're considering new medications.
No, I really appreciate that, and I think that really, keys up Brother Roberts. So Brother Roberts, in addition to participating in Warp Speed, he continues to be involved in FDA approval of medications to counter chemical defense, and so he's still involved in the development of pharmaceuticals to address the Department of Defense. But what I would like him to is to follow on with, and then ask some other questions later. But as you work through that FDA process, that rigorous process that Dr. Narcisse touched on, if you could just hit on some of the key stages that were involved in the development of COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics, and then what was different about that process than a normal process. And again, really touching on some of the fears that folks have had about the vaccine being developed too fast. And I know from a scientific perspective, we didn't start from scratch. So if you could just sort of touch on some of those commentary to align with some of the clinical outcomes and discussions that Brother Narcisse hit on.
Sure, I would like to pull the thread and really kind of go back to what was just stated regarding the pandemic. We were really under the gun during that time, right? Because if you're looking at the development of a vaccine, typically that's years. The process takes 10, 20 years to develop a vaccine if you're given the right amount of time, right? Or so the story's been told, right? And the reason I say that is really I guess in our community specifically, what was lacking during the Operation Warp Speed case study, as well as today, is lack of education, health education, right? And if I was to really focus on what my mission was during that time, I was brought on to support vaccines and therapeutics, but they really had the vaccines kind of locked down, typical development, animal rule type development, normal testing, but at an accelerated pace. So all the safety steps were put in place. They were not testing on humans, but they did conduct clinical trials, all the things that would be done with normal vaccines. So I can assure you all the safety steps were put in place for COVID-19 testing. From my foxhole, and what I saw was I was really pivoted to support convalescent plasma, which we can talk about later, which is the drawing and using of antibodies to fight the actual disease itself, and also other therapeutics. But what we also had to focus on was educating communities at risk, because that was lacking, because it was a new disease that was presenting, as well as there was a lot of skepticism on whether the disease was actually real, right? And so I think that's something that is impacted our ability to be able to fight diseases, and during that stage, as well as in the future, because of all the mis and disinformation. So I don't know if I necessarily answered that question, but
yeah,
please
no,
let
I
me.
think, no, I think, yeah, you definitely hit it. Now, since I got you, one other thing that brother Dr. Narcisse hit on was the cost. If you could just
Right.
give a perspective on what was different about Warp Speed. From my understanding, is that there was a significant investment. Typically, that long period of time is really driven by funding and other regulatory. So if you could just sort of hit on the funding piece and the emergency use authorization, because I think that's something that folks have heard about but may not fully understand. So if you could hit on emergency use authorization and then sort of the money piece that allowed that to happen.
So the emergency use authorization through the FDA, and please correct me if I misstate anything here, is really, you've checked all the blocks, ensuring safety to be able to be used, but it hasn't necessarily received full approval. But given the fact that we're under a state of emergency, it was clear to be able to be used as a vaccine or a therapeutic, right? But typically there's other gates that would have to go through, other regulatory boards that would have to clear. But given the time frame, you're talking about approving a vaccine in less than 6 months, right? That does not typically happen. So that's why when you hear the term emergency use authorization, we're clearing the path to be able to allow you to use a vaccine in under 6 months, which typically would have taken 5 to 10 years to get cleared, because it would have to be, going through stability testing, all other types of regulatory reviews that would have taken a lot of time, but we wanted to save lives in real time, right? And then from there, they accelerated the reviews by putting everyone on deck, everyone being the FDA, various members of other regulatory bodies, to be able to review in order to make sure that it did reach full FDA approval in under a year, which I believe was under a year, which is record time. But you're talking about, while they were doing this, other things were not getting approved. So that's why it's the exception, not the rule. And so I think for people to believe that, they cut corners, no, this was done because nothing else was moving while Operation was moving this vaccine to the front of the line. And then if you want to talk cost, there was a lot of money spent. So for about a year and a half, I was the vaccines and therapeutics program manager. And so I managed a budget that was north of a lot of billions of dollars. I will say that.
Yeah. Now, again, I think you highlight an important aspect. What allowed this to really get done was obviously a lot of folks focused, right? Focused money, focused resources, right, and not taking shortcuts. So there were meetings that may have been scheduled on a quarterly basis were being done weekly. As data were rolling out, FDA probably would have waited until you had all the data to review it. They were reviewing it in real time. So I think really applaud you for your efforts there, and then again, thanks again for sharing your unique experience and perspectives with us. So we'll pivot in the next questions. Is really for Brother Narcisse. So based on that piece, when you approach patients and you educate them from a patient education perspective, answering their questions, that informed consent, should I take it, should I not? So whether it's the COVID vaccine, a new therapeutic, maybe they're switching medications as an internal medicine physician, so what is that process like? And when you have information like during the pandemic, how do you take that information to educate patients? Typically, we always think about doctors not having a whole lot of time to educate patients, but and now you got this now you got a lot more patients that you're trying to take care of. What was that process like, and what was the demand on your own time, from that perspective? So just I know that was a lot, but I know you can unpack it.
Sure. Um, when we start this conversation, we start in the background of the health literacy of the community, right? So this is, what we've taught in elementary school, middle school, high school science to everybody. What people learn about their healthcare from trusted sources um, after they've completed their formal training, and then what we as individual practitioners, um, as a healthcare community, can educate folks. So I think that the education of our community of patients is a huge part of all of this. It obviously starts with us. I mean, I often tell people, I trained 28 years for the job that I hold, starting from the earliest forms of my formal education. So I spent a lot of my time, most of my adult life, preparing for this. So when folks say, well, look, I can get the same information on TikTok, well, maybe you can and maybe you can't. I would actually argue that the source of the information becomes really important. And because the pandemic brought a unique set of challenges where people were, the healthcare community and the broader community were learning things about COVID-19 at the same time. The trusted voices role was somewhat blurred, and so there was a space that developed. And unfortunately, there's an economic model that's built around healthcare disinformation. And so there are people who made money by trying to tell individuals in my community about treatments that may not have been as rigorously tested, interventions that may or may not have financially impacted people. Hey, use this type of we won't say bleach, but use this type of a treatment because it'll work. But you didn't know that person had a financial role. The FDA has very, very strict and very, very specific rules around when I can make money off of the drugs that I talk about. And the answer is I typically don't, as a general rule. And that's to try to inspire trust that I'm trying to give you the best recommendation for you, not necessarily the best recommendation for me. Like if you were you're talking to a financial advisor, are they making a commission? Like you're talking to other licensed professionals, and you don't know exactly where their loyalties lie. Well, in medicine, it lies with the patient first, because we want the patient to have a good outcome. And so we do things because we think that they will help. Unfortunately, in COVID-19, again, we just didn't have as much information, especially early. And because the information was in constant update, and sometimes you would change the recommendation from yesterday it was blue and today it's green. When people would see that, then they would say, well, gosh, then if you could change the recommendation from blue to green, then maybe the green recommendation is no good because it's going to be replaced by something else later. So this type of trust was a very, very, very difficult thing to navigate. And then again, everyone has their own personal belief system that they bring to this conversation. So there are people who sort of inherently don't like vaccines, even though vaccines have saved the lives of millions, perhaps billions of humans. It's been literally the type of medical technology intervention that has completely changed the shape of our planet and of our human population. People live now that would have died in years past because of the lack of vaccines. So this trust is something that I hope that patients have in me, but somebody that I just met, or somebody who is getting information at the same day that I'm getting it on the New York Times, and the Journal of American Medical Association and the American College of Physicians, they may look at my trustworthiness differently. And so we had to spend a lot of time working through that. One of the reasons why I am a Deputy Surgeon General is because I really want to get good information out to people, out to our brothers specifically, but the community at large, because so that we can have a conversation, we can have a very cogent one, because these decisions are complicated, and the bigger the risk to the patient, the more time these conversations require. Hey, I've got a new chemotherapy. It might some patients are going to die because of it, but all these other patients are going to live because of it. But people take a chemotherapeutic drug because they understand the risk of having that cancer. Unfortunately, because of the way that the HIPAA rules and protect individual patients' privacy, I still, as much coverage as the news media gave to patients dying with COVID-19, there's still people who don't believe that COVID-19 kills patients. And I saw that regularly. I've lost many patients. I lost a patient to COVID-19 just a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, sorry, 2 weeks ago. And so that patients still die. They don't die as often because of the beneficial effects of vaccinations, but they still have negative outcomes. And as healthcare professionals, we see that. And so we know what the risk of not treating people would be, because we see that every day. And the people who don't have an office inside the dedicated COVID unit like I do just don't have that same perspective of what this means. I mean, if you ask what did the COVID vaccination mean to me and my family, it meant that I didn't have to sleep in the garage anymore. For more than a year, I literally slept on the sofa above our garage, and I had a separate shower. Food was brought to me specifically, and I didn't see my family the same way on the days that I worked, because we wanted to make sure that they were safe. And so the confidence that the vaccination program provided was instrumental. And so that would not have happened, as you mentioned, without the decades of scientific effort that had gone into vaccinations in general, into studying viruses that were similar to COVID-19, SARS and MERS, and the litany of other things. And so one of the things that a lot of folks that question the speed of the COVID-19 vaccinations didn't quite appreciate, didn't quite understand, is that there was a lot of work in very, very similar types of diseases that was essentially ported over. And so, as you pointed out, Brother Carter, we didn't start from zero. We started from a place where, hey, we're almost ready. We just need to change a few things. And so the few things needed to be changed, and the few things needed to be checked for safety. The few things needed to be checked to see how efficacious it was. A few things needed to be checked to see what side effects it would have on a broader population, as opposed to starting from scratch. And I think that people didn't quite get that message, because not every news outlet communicated that the same way.
Yeah, no, really appreciate that. And I think we're going to try and unpack a little bit of that with Brother Roberts. And one of the things that comes to mind, I know that he was at the nexus between DOD, working with the pharmaceutical industry, but an important portion of that whole team was the Department of Health and Human Services, which is charged with doing some patient education, public health education. And as you pointed out, at the peak of the pandemic, there was definitely disinformation, mistrust that was being generated, alternative narratives. And I would like Brother Roberts to really just, highlight an initiative, I think, that was critical to addressing the health equity piece. So if you could just talk a little bit about, I think, an important aspect that was
Sure.
important to getting the a level playing field. So if you could just talk about the HHS Health Equity Initiative, that would be great.
Yes, sir. No, so thank you so much. So in March of 2021, some of our members we were part of, we were advisors to Health and Human Services. Working with them, we were partnered with them to serve on a presidential initiative. It was a $150 million initiative to expand treatments to underserved communities. Through that, we were increasing monoclonal antibody treatment to high-risk patients in underserved communities in targeted geographic areas across the country. Really the benefits of this is we were able to treat close to almost 60,000 patients, and we used a severity index code to really look at, it didn't matter where you were, it was just basically based on the health of your location, right? Really, we were the average age of the patient was about 53 years old, and we were active in about 31 states, and we avoided up to about $300 million in hospitalization expenses. And so we launched in Prince George's County, Maryland. We partnered with actually Houston Methodist and the city of Houston with other hospitals to be able to expand care throughout there. And what we were actually doing was we found that we were working in the DC area that, access to care is one of those things where if you're a community at risk, the reason you don't have access to care is a lot of financial reasons a lot of times. So we're able to negotiate with some of those health systems to be able to set up through contracts infusion sites to be able to receive patients. And so we set up websites, call centers, all these other types of locations to be able to receive calls and be able to accept those patients. So we were working with HHS and the regional health system to be able to set those sites up. We also were active in Detroit, Maryland, Detroit, Michigan, West Virginia, Massachusetts, and other various locations. At the height of our program, we were able to have a catchment area that was able to reach about 43 million people. And the U.S. population currently is about 329 million. So what we're able to prove through our project was that you could support in a pandemic a rapidly built, targeted response system. And that's where you're ultra-focused, using existing health systems to leverage their capabilities to provide targeted care for those in need. And I think really what it was able to do for us was to ensure that those who did not have access or the ability to receive care were able to be seen in real time and be able to get the infusion care that they needed. This was during the height of the Omicron and Delta variants. And so it was a very rewarding opportunity for us to be able to provide that support.
Again, really appreciate you sharing that perspective. I think that just highlights the criticality of how the warp speed, what that really meant, the investment to basically ensure that health equities were actually being addressed. And as I mentioned earlier in my comments, just some of the challenges as a community that we had to overcome. So the foresight of the federal government to partner with and get all those key stakeholders to overcome that barrier to ensure that vaccines and therapeutics were available is just paramount. Again, I think you even mentioned Houston. So I know that Brother Narcisse was there in Houston playing a pivotal role on the execution side. So we go from strategic down to the rubber meeting the road. So I would just like, Brother Narcisse to just talk about his knowledge of that process and how that helped him, enabled him to that collaborative process from between the clinical community and again what was going on there, and just share his overall assessment of how that enabled and made his job as a clinician in Houston easier.
So one of the things we talk about is health equity, right? So this is meaning that there's equal access to treatments and to care. This becomes especially important when there seems to be a disproportionate risk in our communities. And so COVID-19 was one of those diseases that really shone a spotlight that something was going on that put people who look like myself at higher risk of dying than other individuals. So in the earliest days, when we were using monoclonal antibodies, and it seemed like monoclonal antibody treatment was saving people's lives, there was a concern that this was not being accessed through the community equally. That to get access to monoclonal antibody, you had to have a referral from a physician. Well, again, African Americans have a primary care doctor less frequently than other populations. Or you had to have access to a subspecialist, same kinds of access concerns. And then there were hoops that initially had to be overcome to get the monoclonal antibodies. And it just seemed as though those hoops were being managed disproportionately in certain communities and not being accomplished in other communities. And this is so important when we see that a treatment might be helpful, and so the people who were at greatest risk were not seemingly getting access to the treatments. And so a lot of effort was placed into the logistics of trying to connect communities and these treatments. Now, this is exceptionally important when the community doesn't necessarily understand, doesn't have knowledge of the treatment, and has an inherent distrust of the healthcare community. So here we're bending over backwards to try to bring these treatments to a community that isn't quite sure that it even wants it, regardless of the cost or regardless of what it might mean. So a lot of work, a lot of conversation had to be had. Again, it starts with trust. And if you trust your healthcare provider, if you trust your physician, then then receiving information that those individuals are providing becomes a very much easier task than if you don't trust these people. So if you have trusted resources in the healthcare community, that makes a huge difference. But if you are like many people who look like myself, again, don't have a physician, don't have access, have lots of medical problems, the healthcare community has not treated individuals like myself well. And we spoke of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. That still sounds like ancient history to so many. But in my own family, my grandmother, my grandparents were brought to Tuskegee, Alabama as part of the war effort. My mother was born in Tuskegee, and my grandmother knew and met a number of people who were actually enrolled in the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Just knew them at the market, at the grocery store kind of a place in the community, and everyone knew who they were at the even in the 40s and the mid 40s when my grandmother was there. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment was ongoing, was well known to the community. So building trust is an important piece. So as part of the Surgeon General initiative, we try to bring healthcare information from a trusted source. In this venue, I did similar videos at work. I encourage my other colleagues to use their platforms across social media through their church networks and in their community organizations and their Divine Nine organizations to try to share the information we did have and to be transparent. That transparency is part of this process. Hey, we don't know all the answers. Is an acceptable thing to share? I think it's okay. In fact, when we really don't know, it's better to say that we don't know than to pretend as though we do and then to be wrong later. So I think that that kind of transparency is important. And as we go forward, trying to address not just COVID-19, but a panoply of medical problems, we will learn more in the future than we have learned in the past. And only that will happen if the community helps educate itself, helps the healthcare community learn. So what am I doing about that now? I've just recently been accepted as a researcher for an NIH program called All of Us. It's one that Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, the other organizations of the Pan-Hellenic have sponsored, so that we can enroll individuals who will share their stories, share their health histories, sit down and talk about their health issues with the data scientists, and then the scientists can then try to find linkages about what is actually transpiring. Hey, look, it's through this type of research that we realized that African Americans were more susceptible to sickle cell anemia. Well, that's a sort of a no-brainer thing in today's day and age, but there was a time when that was new information. So we try to constantly find these new concerns, these new linkages, new things that we can address, start to bring medications to the market, so that it can positively affect people in our community. And this is an ongoing effort. It's literally will take the rest of my life. My sons are in middle school, high school. It'll be all of their lives that will be doing these efforts. So the community can help by having a sense of patience and also participation. The scientists, the healthcare providers have to understand that my community doesn't trust the healthcare community because of the misdeeds that the healthcare community has done in the past. So having transparency and around that conversation is an important and a critical piece. For every research study that's done successfully in a drug that comes to market, that might take $1 billion, several $1 billion, but years of work at the bench, in preclinical models and in animals, early clinical evaluations in humans. All those things had to happen for a new greatest drug to be available for diabetes mellitus.
Again, really appreciate that commentary, because I think you hit on a number of important aspects and topics. And I would say one of those that you hit on was the historical aspect and the importance of communication and dialogue, from the patient all the way up to the national level. That process and of addressing trust and misinformation, overcoming some of that. And so I would like Brother Roberts to just talk a little bit about, from his perspective, the importance of the communication strategy, and if he could just touch on, from his perspective, he talked about the disparity in zip codes and stuff like that, and the travel. How did it impact travel from his perspective, and any conversations that were being at his level when, as he was part of Operation Warp Speed. Just share some light on the communication strategy, and also how travel was being discussed, travel health, during that time, because we would often hear, if you go have dinner with grandma, have it outdoors. And so how was some of those conversations, being discussed at that level?
Yeah, no. So, yeah, I think that really what our focus on in our Crush COVID endeavor. So what we did is we kind of branded our messaging. We made it clear and simple. We had a multicultural approach. I think we're all kind of talking the same thing here when you talk about the travel approach of making sure that you broke it down in a clear, concise message for the community that you're approaching. Because it's sad that in 2020 we're talking about distrust in the health system, right? But I would say what I learned in a lot of my endeavors during Operation Warp Speed, because unbeknownst to a lot of folks, our teams, we were out in the community as part of the community trying to fight this disease. So we were working alongside our healthcare providers, trying to ensure that we could, meet the need of the nation. And I would just say that we were listening to the community. So from our foxhole in the therapeutics lane, there was almost a redlining of communities for their access to care, right? And so, when we talk to certain markets, it was, if we allow this community to come in for COVID today, then they're always going to come to us tomorrow for their, heart attacks or, other types of healthcare, right? And those were eye-opening things that we had to learn as, the providers of this emergency healthcare, right? And so, trying to increase access and work in those partnerships with, all parties was a difficult thing. But I do think that, as a community, what we do need to do is work to educate one another on the importance of healthcare, preventative healthcare, right? And trying to, encourage our young folks coming up to take care of themselves, right? Because a lot of the things that we saw affecting our communities for COVID-19 were pre-existing health conditions. And that's what I think that we could perhaps assist one another in preventing in the future. So really, that's what we were focused on, because we were trying to get people help for those pre-existing health conditions, comorbidities, if you will, and also preventing them from catching COVID-19 or get the treatment that was needed for COVID-19 through our messaging, right? Because there were certain times where people were afraid to go outside, people were afraid to meet with people were afraid to do all these other things, but we had to send it in messaging that they could understand. So we had to get a messaging campaign that was directed. It was on Facebook. We had trusted agents, some folks that were known to be we had Reed Tuckson, Vin Gupta, some other folks that are known in the public space that were supporting our initiative. And I think it was really good, but for future use, it's something that could be more, packaged up and used again. Over.
No, I really appreciate that. And I think you hit on some impact on quite a bit there. And again, thanks for sharing that communication strategy, and also recognizing some of the things that we actually learned. And so I'll come back to you, but I want to hit I want to ask Brother Narcisse a few questions here. I want you to think about, and I want you to be thinking about, your take home message. We have about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to ask Brother Narcisse, you know, from the clinical perspective, if you could just summarize, how do you think we're institutionalizing the lessons learned? So because obviously we learned a lot, but often in America we have short memories, right? So what are you seeing from your perspective that we're doing to conserve what we learned, so that the next time we have a pandemic or an emergency crisis, that we can basically have a medical force, a public health system that actually has resilience and will be able to pivot. And while we still may have to work through developing the vaccine, we'll have the institutional knowledge, because it seems that we had a pandemic 100 years ago, and we were questioning how they dealt and addressed some of those, and we ended up incorporating some of those lessons, but it took us a while. So what are we doing to preserve that knowledge base? You're on mute, brother.
Thank you so much for having me on this discussion, and I'm so proud to be speaking alongside brother Roberts. It's just amazing the work that your team did. The way that we memorialize the work and to remember those who died is to continue a conversation around healthcare. That we need to take care of ourselves and really work on our chronic diseases, that we need to continue to educate and build trusted sources of information, so that when we get our information, that our kids are not getting more healthcare information from social media feeds of uncertain validity, and rather from trusted places. So the conversation that we have here every other Thursday evening, the next one I guess is Thursday, March the 7th. This is a tremendous way to think about what has happened, and to thank those who have done so much work, to remember those who've died, and to realize that how many more thousands, how many more millions of people would have died had it not been for the work of Brother Roberts and his team. So this is one of those things that I hope for years to come isn't a thing that we avoid talking about, because it's no longer new and interesting and sexy. I hope it's the thing that we continue to talk about, because we realize that this type of work saved the world, and that conversation has to be continued to be shared, because I think that there in many ways there are more vaccine skeptic people now than there were before the pandemic, and their skepticism has flowed over to measles, mumps, and rubella, tetanus, and diphtheria vaccinations. These things that we know work, that save lives. So we need to continue to share the word. And thanks to the two of you for all the work that you do to further this conversation.
Thank you, brother. And I'll pivot and give Brother Roberts again kudos, and I'll provide some closing remarks here shortly. But again, the nation really turned and leveraged expertise from the Department of Defense, and obviously we're able to leverage that expertise and experience so that we can also protect the nation, but also protect the nation from a defense perspective, as we learn how to develop faster medical countermeasures against a variety of threats. So from your perspective, and again, you can share from any perspective that you would like, but just what are your commentary, and how is the Department of Defense, how are we actually, helping memorialize, preserve this critical knowledge that we gained to support the nation if we're called again? I know We've supported the nation during the Ebola crisis. The Department of Defense is typically called to be on the forefront of this. So if you could just share a little bit about how we're institutionalizing this and how this knowledge will be preserved so that we don't start from scratch from a response perspective.
Well, thank you. First of all, Brother Narcisse, thank you so much for the kind words. And really, I'm truly honored to be up here with you. And thank you for all the work that you did in Houston. Really, as a logistician myself, we are here to serve you all as the providers, and you're the true heroes. I say that truthfully because, for anyone who has doubt on, vaccines or vaccine hesitancy, our providers never had doubt, right? Because they were providing service when there was no vaccine, right? So we were aiming to get to a vaccine while there were people, men and women, putting their lives on the line, right? And so I think the message that I would have is twofold. From a DoD perspective, that's my job. That's what I'm here to do, is to defend the nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic, right? Whether that be a person or a germ, right? So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to figure it out. The other thing too is, I think from just a human perspective, and a brother as well as a family member, the reason I got involved in this is my dad's brother died in a Jersey hospital from COVID, him and his wife, right? And they were in their 70s. They died alone during the pandemic, right? And their entire life was thrown away for $500. Their entire apartment was thrown away for $500 because we had to call a got junk truck and haul it away because nobody was there. I'm from Hawaii, so everybody was in Hawaii. I was in Texas, everybody was away, right? So if you're skeptical of vaccines, right, just think about your life being thrown away for $500, because that's what's going to happen if you're at risk and you are going to be around folks that are going to be ill, then that can be you. And I would say that please reach out to your healthcare provider or someone that understands healthcare and get the information. Don't go to Facebook. Don't go to Instagram or TikTok to find out the information. You need to go to a real healthcare provider to find out, because you only get one of these things, and that's called life, right? And you need to go find out these from educated sources. And the last thing I'll tell you is there's very few of us that are in this vaccine development and healthcare space. There's even fewer Black males. And so if you are a mentor or a mentee or a mentor to young Black males, please have them reach out to one of us and have them pick our brains, because we need more of us so that we are thought of as they're developing these drugs and also as we're fighting these diseases, because that's why oftentimes our communities are not thought of. That's all I have, sir.
No, again, really appreciate both of you, phenomenal panel members, and to everybody that had an opportunity to hear this commentary and will hear it. First of all, my takeaway from our discussion is that, first of all, despite the historical past that contributed to probably some of the health inequities that we see today, where individuals may have been mistreated as part of a process of developing therapies or understanding medical processes, we have a lot more confidence that the process is conserved and has resilience, and also that there is a well-documented process and learning that's actually taken place over the course of the pandemic. So I would just, really like to applaud both of you for the critical roles that you play and that you continue to play. And most importantly, when we think about, Alpha Phi Alpha, our fraternity has been involved historically through major milestones, whether it's voting rights, whether it's education. And I think that this conversation really helps and highlights the Alpha Phi Alpha's motto of first of all, servants of all, we shall transcend all. So I want to first of all applaud you, and I'm super happy that we had an opportunity to actually do this as Alpha Men. And also, just to put a plug to Brother Robert's point, an important aspect of our fraternity historically has been academic excellence, leadership, and service. And part of that service that's much needed, as you talked about today, is to continue to ensure that we are doing everything we possibly can to attract young Black men, minority men, and women, the community, to the profession, whether it's medical research, the logistics piece, acquiring those, working in the pharmaceutical industry, on the front lines as physicians, nurses, in various medical professions. So again, I charge everybody that's listening today, specifically our brothers, that as you're taking on initiatives within your community, think about initiatives that help to educate your communities about the where to get accurate information, and also to continue to initiate opportunities and programs to actually increase the number of individuals involved in this overall process. And the final thing I would like to say is that I hope after listening to this commentary from trusted agents that you have more confidence in the overall vaccine process, and that you utilize that information to not only better protect yourself, not just from COVID, but the numerous vaccines that are out there to protect your family. Because as Brother Narcisse and Surgeon General Brother Sterling pointed out, on a daily basis as internal medicine and emergency physicians, they're seeing people still die from COVID, from other preventable, whether it's pneumonia vaccine, pneumovax. All of these vaccines are there to help preserve life and give you an opportunity for your own body to be able to fight these critical conditions. Much like Brother Roberts, I lost my grandfather actually in the early phases of the pandemic, died alone in a nursing home outside of Baton Rouge, actually a rehab facility outside of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I remember attending his funeral virtually because at the time it wasn't advised to travel or to congregate in large numbers. So each one of us, whether we were impacted by a family member, a loved one, or somebody else, we all share a common story and fabric that all of us that survived and thrived and during that period of time, whether we were infected and survived, we're all impacted in some way. So I would like the audience, the folks that listen, to basically take what you've learned today, share it wide, and as you travel, as you engage, as whatever you do, obviously we're getting close to spring breaks, right? So ensure that your family is protected, because it would be tragic that that all the sweat, blood, and tears and individuals that we've lost if we didn't do everything possible to protect ourselves and our families. It's especially from a preventable disease, right? We got therapies and everything else. We have to continue to protect and support each other as we face these challenges. Again, I would like to thank everybody for attending, and really like to thank my two dear brothers for participating tonight. Thanks, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Excuse me.